Alright, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Rebirth with this video, and we are discussing the potential controllable, playable Sephiroth when it comes to this game. Now, this has been a popular conversation for quite a while. As far back as like before Remake even came out in like early 2020, this goes back to people were talking about this like 2019 and maybe even before then, right? It could go back potentially, I guess, as far as the reveal of Remake itself, just because the Kalm Flashback is kind of the only segment of the FF7 story where there's Cloud and Sephiroth together, so that's kind of the only potential for us to have a playable, controllable Sephiroth. Now, for once when it comes to these like single discussion videos, we actually have talked about this before. It seems so often whenever we do this, it's something we've talked about, but it's like in a different video with a bunch of other topics and shit, and we search it up on the channel and usually can't find me doing a dedicated video about it. This one we actually did. We actually have talked about playable Sephiroth before, but this is almost 2 years ago. This was actually from this month in 2020, October 26th, 2020 to be exact. So that video is almost 2 years old, and a lot's changed since then, right? For one, we got a DLC for Remake, which back during the time that I would have made that video was simply just an idea, a rumor, a theory that the community had. Whether or not we'd ever have DLC for the game, we didn't actually know, but obviously that ended up being true. Now, the DLC itself isn't necessarily important to this conversation, though there is one aspect of it that we're going to discuss. And then obviously now in 2022, we had the reveal of Remake Part 2, which we now know to be FF7 Rebirth. But also the trailer we got for the game actually involves the Kalm Flashback, which is kind of what sparked this debate again, at least a couple months ago. So this idea of a controllable Sephiroth has existed since OG FF7, from the Kalm Flashback, of course. Having Sephiroth be a part of Cloud's party, and his like stats are way better than ours. We die in one hit, he's absolutely decimating everything, except the dragon. He takes a couple hits on the dragon to actually kill him. But it's always left fans wondering what it'd be like to actually play as and control Sephiroth. He's only level 50, which is still pretty goddamn strong, especially compared to Cloud. It's even like stronger than what your party would be during the Kalm segments, right? But it's not necessarily that high. I don't know why you don't just, during the Kalm Flashback, they should have just made Sephiroth like level 99, right? Just give him like completely max stats, insane gear material, and stuff like that. I don't know, it seems kind of odd to cap him at 50. So given that the fan demand's been there for the better part of 25 years now, I could see them wanting to do that for like the fan service, just because, you know, the fan base has kind of been asking for that forever. But putting aside fan service, which they could very well do, it doesn't really make sense for us to have a controllable Sephiroth. For one, when it comes to Remake, we have multiple instances of guest party members, people that are fighting alongside us, but we can't actually control. We can issue commands to them, but we can't switch over to them and actually control them and fight, right? Now, when we did the video back in 2020, our only example of this was Red 13. I did mention that in that previous video as well. But obviously, we got a DLC the next year, and the kind of same thing happened with Sonon. Now, Sonon's a little bit better of a party member than Red 13 in that you can actually customize him, level him up, swap out his materia and gear and stuff like that, and obviously edit his weapon cores. He's pretty much everything that a party member is, except for the ability to actually switch to him during combat. Now, the purpose of mentioning this is that there's already this precedent set with the Remake games, I guess technically if you want to call it that, the different iterations, the DLC and the base game, where we're seeing this trope of a guest party member, and that's exactly what Sephiroth was in the original FF7. So just based on that, it's kind of hard to say whether or not they would want to make him actually fully controllable if they wouldn't even do it with somebody that's actually a part of your party, right? He's the main antagonist of the story. It would be kind of weird, as fun as it would be, as good a fan service as it would be, it'd be kind of weird to be like playing as and controlling the main antagonist. I've also used this example before. I don't know if it's in that previous video though, but the purpose of the Kalm Flashback, besides Cloud explaining the history that he has with Sephiroth, is to show you how strong Sephiroth is, right? Because you hear about it all the time, the war hero, he might have died some years ago. How strong was he really? It's kind of the purpose. That's why you see the huge level gap between Cloud and Sephiroth during that flashback and him decimating that giant dragon. And when it comes to Rebirth, we don't really need that. I mean, that's not to say that we're not going to have the Kalm Flashback, because of course we are. For one, it's in the goddamn trailer. But it doesn't need to be partially this narrative device to show you how strong Sephiroth is, because we fought him firsthand. He was throwing buildings at us and shit. And he's stronger during the end of Remake than he was during the Kalm Flashback stuff, right? So again, it doesn't need to be the showcase of Sephiroth's power. But of course, there's still the fan service aspect of it. Even if it's not supposed to be the showcase of Sephiroth's power, doesn't mean that they wouldn't make him playable, because maybe just do it for the fans, right? That's all it's got to be. Now, when it comes to the Rebirth trailer, we do get to see a little bit of what is the Kalm Flashback. We see Cloud and Sephiroth kind of walking forward towards maybe Nibelheim. It could be also past Nibelheim, walking towards Mount Nibel type shit. We don't exactly know, right? Now, where I had seen the conversation of a controllable Sephiroth pop up again based on the Rebirth trailer was actually from Max, whenever he did like a 30-minute like discussion or whatever it was for the trailer. And it's kind of down to the possibility of there being some camera trickery during the trailer itself, where it looks like you're controlling Cloud or whatever, but it's actually you controlling Sephiroth, and they're just kind of messing with shit, I guess. But also kind of boiled down to the animations that the characters have, specifically in the second scene that you get, where you actually see Cloud kind of like climb up a rock, but Sephiroth's kind of walking normal. And to be clear, I'm just using Max as an example just because he's one of the main pillars in this community, if not the pillar. I mean, if he does like an FF7 related video, it usually gets hundreds of thousands of views, right? So he's kind of the guy when it comes to FF7. So a lot of people take his opinions and thoughts, very seriously. I find it kind of weird, though, that he puts a lot of stake in just Cloud doing a unique animation, given that it's 2022. Like, this isn't, a PlayStation game or Nintendo or something. Like, a character kind of hopping up on a rock doesn't really amount to much. It doesn't have to be a computer-controlled character to climb up a rock, right? And look, I get the logic that he has here just because their animations are very, very different, right? Cloud's actually doing shit and Sephiroth just casually walks up those rocks. But also, regardless of whether you are or aren't controlling Sephiroth, he would never do what Cloud's doing in the scene anyway, right? He's a very stoic character. He's not a very flashy character, right? He wouldn't be hopping around climbing up rocks and shit when there's a clear path he can just walk up like he does in the scene. That's just the kind of character that Sephiroth is. But also when it comes to Rebirth, we simply do not know what the gameplay is going to be like for this game. We do know we're going to have a bigger world to explore, a much bigger game, potentially some level of like open world or big zones to explore, etc., etc. And there could be some level of platforming, the ability to climb up and over shit, right? For all we know, the animation that Cloud's doing is something we're going to do a lot throughout Rebirth. Maybe that's kind of the point of showing it in the trailer, the beginning segments of Rebirth, the early parts of the game where you'd be learning this new gameplay mechanic. And also the idea of they're messing with like camera angles during the trailer to make it appear like you're controlling Cloud despite the fact that you're actually going to be controlling Sephiroth, I think that's a reach, man. Let's be honest here. That's some tinfoil hat territory type stuff, because it's like, I truly believe that we're going to control Sephiroth during the Kalm Flashback. So for that reason alone, the devs are messing with the camera angles. Like, I don't know. Come on. That's a bit much. But also, if you pay attention to the multiple scenes that we get in the trailer, it's pretty clear that we're controlling Cloud given his placement on screen. I don't think that they're messing with camera angles or whatever the case. But the point of this shot right here specifically is you're seeing Cloud walk solo. You don't quite know where he's at when you're first watching this trailer. And when you have Sephiroth walk on screen from the side, he's not on screen with Cloud at the beginning. It's to let you know that this is the Kalm Flashback. That's the entire purpose of the shot. Also, with the way this scene starts out as well, given the placement of Cloud, I think it's pretty clear that you're actually controlling him, right? But also something that I think people ignore is that once they get to the rocks, about the time that Cloud starts like kind of hopping up and climbing up on the rocks, the camera starts swinging upwards to give you this like wide shot of maybe Nibelheim or Mountain Bell, whatever it is. So it's decently likely that that is a cutscene, right? So there's a pretty good odds that we're not controlling anybody during this time. Now, obviously, when it comes to the Final Fantasy series, we have countless examples of the ability to like control a character while cutscenes happening, while something happening in the background, cinematic, whatever the case. But we haven't seen that with Remake yet. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen with Rebirth, but generally speaking, when a cutscene's happening with Remake, you lose all control, right? You just kind of sit back and watch. Now, putting a lot of that stuff aside, something I think a lot of people are forgetting, including Max, is that the idea of a controllable Sephiroth has always been about combat, right? Because that's where we see him with the original FF7. He's in our party. When we fight somebody, he's alongside us. We can't control him. It's never been about controlling Sephiroth while traversing the world, because that just doesn't make any sense, right? The Kalm Flashback is Cloud recalling his memories of what happened during the Nibelheim incident. He's telling a story, right? He's telling a story from what he believes to be his perspective of the events that happened. So it wouldn't make sense to be controlling Sephiroth at really any point at all outside of maybe during combat. But I think given the way they handled Red 13 at the end of Remake and how they handled Sonon with the intermission DLC, it's kind of up for debate whether or not we'd even be able to control him at all during battle now. Because back then it was just Red 13. Then we get another example of it, a year later. I don't know, man. We were seeing this trend of guest party members, and that could be purposeful. Maybe it's to subvert expectations. You're used to not being able to control, certain party members, right? And you couldn't control Sephiroth in OGFF7. That's kind of the mindset you would think based on the evidence going into Rebirth that you wouldn't control him either. And maybe they subvert expectations and let you. That could be a possibility. Something else that is important to mention too is when it comes to Remake, you're always controlling Cloud outside of specific moments, right? But if you run around as your party, as a group, it's like Tifa, Barret, Cloud, you're only Cloud, right? You can set like a party leader to where, or whatever it's called, where whenever you go into battle, you automatically switch to that character. But as you're walking around the world, you're always Cloud. So unless they change that with Rebirth, again, there wouldn't really be a reason why we'd be controlling Sephiroth. But again, similar to the climbing, platforming aspect, if you do have the ability to swap between who you control and walk around as in the world, that could be something to have at the beginning of the game. Because the game's going to start out with Kalm Flashback, Cloud and Sephiroth. Maybe you can swap over to Sephiroth. That's just teaching you the new mechanic. So to be clear, it's not that I'm against the idea of a controllable Sephiroth, and they could absolutely implement it simply for fan service alone. But from a narrative perspective, it doesn't make sense. Cloud is recalling the worst day of his life. So why would we be playing a Sephiroth? We're supposed to be controlling Cloud during that moment. So that's why it's my belief that if we have any sort of control over Sephiroth at all, it's only going to be in the middle of battle, right? And I don't even know if we'd have the ability to tab over and actually control him like we do Tifa, Barret, Aerith, and stuff like that, right? It might just be something similar to Sonon or Red 13 or Summons, where he can just kind of issue commands and he kind of fights by himself. But I do think being able to control him in the middle of battle would be the nice middle ground, because you could still walk around and see his animations and physically attack with him and issue your own commands, use up his ATB and his magic and shit like that. Like, that'd be pretty cool, right? You don't need to walk around the world controlling Sephiroth. As cool as it'd be, there's just no point to it. And I'm fairly certain I mentioned this with the previous video, but we fought Sephiroth at the end of Remake, right? So he has full-on complete battle animations from basic attacks to certain abilities and things like that. So it wouldn't really be that hard to implement him into being a playable character. We've already seen the community do this with Red 13, right? He was just a guest party member, but he has his own battle attacks and animations and stuff like that. People were able to mod him into being a playable character. So it wouldn't really be that hard for Square Enix to do that with Sephiroth. But my dudes, that's going to be pretty much the video. So I want to revisit this topic because, for one, the video we did, of course, was so long ago, and Remake was only like half a year old or some shit at that point when I did that video. So we obviously know more about Remake and the project and what they're doing, more examples of guest characters, etc., etc. I want to do a more comprehensive discussion on it because that video is also only 4 minutes or something, and this one's obviously much longer. And also when it comes to Max's idea of a playable Sephiroth based on the Rebirth trailer, I know it's kind of a popular idea. I've heard it at least several times since we got the trailer. So I also want to kind of get my thoughts on that as well. But of course, I just want to pass off to you guys. So what are your thoughts on a playable Sephiroth when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? Specifically, if you think he's going to be playable, in what way? Is it traversing the world? Is it in combat? Is it both? What are your thoughts? But my dudes, that's going to be the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new today. More Final Fantasy VII Rebirth content. Turn on notifications. Follow me to _YT. I'm my Discord. Links for the networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.